The whole of the skyline is lit up. There are leaping flames. It's almost like the Day of Judgment.
Night after night, the bombs fell from the sky. 70 years on, Londoners share their memories of the Blitz.
Planes used to come over every night and you could more or less know when they were going to come, get your tea ready, get ready to go down the shelter.
It was a most horrendous sky. I've never seen anything so red.
Then the house was bombed and it all collapsed and we all fell down with the brickwork.
We were quite frightened, but on the other hand, you took it in your stride.
The ladies have come together as part of the West End at War project organised by Westminster Archives and the Churchill War Rooms in Whitehall, which is where they meet, down in the Chiefs of Staff room.
When there was the rage, we used to run across to their shelter. I can remember putting my hands on my head, thinking it's going to save me from shrapnel.
70 years ago tomorrow, the bombing raids began. On the 7th of September 1940, almost 1,000 German aircraft crossed the Channel. The Blitz had begun. By the end of May the following year, over 20,000 Londoners had been killed, with the docks and East End worst hit. 4 of these women lived in Pimlico at the time, including Rose.
All the docks, they were all alike. I've never seen such a place. And we were looked up towards Westminster Abbey and that, and it was just one blaze. So tall the flames were going.
I spent the best part of my life in the air raid shelter.
We lost our home, but they got us out. One girl was newly married and she had a baby, and she went as well.
Londoners sheltered where they could, many down on the tube. Shops stayed open and transport kept London moving. There were 57 consecutive nights of bombing at the start of the first wave of the Blitz.
It is said that you could read a newspaper in Shaftesbury Avenue on that evening from the fires coming from the East End of London. So that gives you some idea of the distance. Morale did dip, but then I think that people's morale went up again, and they felt visits by the King and Queen, by Churchill, did boost morale.
Jean remembers meeting the Queen in the rubble of her house in Hammersmith.
She said, "Hello, my dear, what happened to you?" So I said, "Well, my house got bombed last night." She said, "Well, my dear, I think everyone else's did as well." Yeah, I survived. Oh, Hitler was frightened of me, I think.
There would be many dark days ahead, but the Blitz spirit was born.
The whole of the skyline is lit up. There are leaping flames. It's almost like the Day of Judgment.
70 years ago tonight, Broadcasting House took a direct hit. The Blitz had begun in early September. German planes bombed night after night. On the 15th of October 1940, 7 people died here.
A huge £500 delay action bomb hit the side of Broadcasting House. It came in through the 7th floor window. It then rolled down to the 5th floor where it lodged for a whole hour.
What they say about the Blitz spirit is absolutely true.
John Longdon was in the canteen when the bomb fell, an 18-year-old broadcast engineer.
Suddenly there was a kind of, it wasn't a very loud bang, it was a thud. The story we heard was that it was sticking out at the side of the building, and somebody had pulled it in with the idea of defusing it.
And then Bruce Belfridge began to read the 9 o'clock news.
In the middle of it, the bomb explodes. Horrific, destroying several stories, and as the plaster was flaking and the ceiling was falling over his head, he paused, coughed, and then a voice of a studio manager said, "It's all right, sir." And he then carried on with huge British sang-froid and finished his bulletin.
The explosion killed 4 men and 3 women. The original bulletin wasn't recorded, but later Bruce Belfridge broadcast a reconstruction.
Here is a fairly exact reproduction of what listeners actually heard. It will be by Lord Lloyd, the Colonial Secretary.
The Blitz spirit was evident elsewhere in the building. The radio theatre was used as a bomb shelter.
Imagine all the seats gone and staff would be sleeping here in blankets, in sleeping bags overnight.
Across the capital, people were taking shelter where they could. The Blitz continued until the following May, and staff working here made sure that the broadcasts continued too. Matthew Morris, BBC London News. The cosy lounge inside the 1940s house here at the Imperial War Museum, a replica of a suburban semi during the war years. But of course, many young Londoners at the end of 1940 were not in their own homes. So what kind of Christmas was it for the children of the Blitz?
They began to wonder if he had had a bomb on his place. But here he is, the old darling, and his toys aren't rationed.
A morale-boosting newsreel shows Father Christmas visiting as normal. But for the wartime evacuees sent away from London to escape the danger, life was far from normal.
We arrived here on November the 1st, 1940.
A 6-year-old Robert Trevor from Thornton Heath was sent to a house just outside Pangbourne in Berkshire.
And there was this dilapidated hallway, and my mother's heart clearly sank, and she looked down at me and I looked at her, and we both thought, what are we doing here? We didn't have two pennies to rub together, and all the evacuees in Pangbourne were subject to bullying in the local school.
There were 4 families and 21 soldiers in the house.
If there was a red glow over those hills beyond the trees, then we knew that London was under attack by incendiary bombs. And we felt really, really sad when we saw these flames, because we knew that Londoners were being killed, and we felt that we should be there with them. Well, this is the room where we lived, my mother, my 1-year-old sister and me, for 2 years.
They saved up some coal for Christmas, but would there be a delivery of presents?
No, she said, he can't come from the North Pole because he might get shot down by the German anti-aircraft gunners. It was the worst Christmas of my life, and ended up with my mother and I going to bed early to keep warm and singing Christmas carols.
London had been attacked, other towns and cities, most famously Coventry, had been attacked, and so it was very much Christmas under fire. There aren't any hard and fast rules, but I think the thing is, for a lot of children, it was a great adventure.
Children such as Nat Roos, an 8-year-old who'd not long returned to Stepney after the previous year's evacuations, now dodging machine gun fire from German planes.
I can remember Mum throwing herself across my brother and I, and the bullets, trace bullets above her head. We picked them up afterwards, souvenirs, you see. And Mum said, right, that's it, you've got to go away again.
He was sent to a farm in Northamptonshire, where he had fresh food, friends, even his own bedroom.
And we had a terrific time. We didn't know there was a war one.
And he didn't know what had happened to his mother, who'd stayed behind in London.
Now, Mummy'd already been dead, 2 months. We had no idea of this.
She'd been killed in the October, but at Christmas you didn't know.
Christmas, that's right. I still didn't know. I was still sending letters home.
He found out in the new year she had died in a bomb blast. The raids did stop for a few days over Christmas, but it would be a long time before many young Londoners could come home. Matthew Morris, BBC London News. A Christmas carol in a 1940 newsreel for the American audience, sending the message that the Blitz spirit survives underground. Those who sheltered remember the dust, the noise and the lack of space.
I came down to the Holborn tube and slept more or less on this platform here. And then it was a strange experience, because you were here, the trains were coming in, you had passengers coming in, treading over you. We just kind of, you might say, rather like squatters came in, and that was it.
He went underground again the next Christmas. Len is the boy on the table.
We made decorations and put decorations up, then had a little function, but it was wartime, so there was not a great deal.
Early government fears that tube sheltering would lead to a siege mentality are shown on original posters at the Under Attack exhibition at the London Transport Museum.
So there were bans on using the tube for sheltering early part of the Blitz, and essentially Londoners took this into their own hands. There's one instance where the gates of the station were forced open at night, having been locked by the police, and they took occupation of the platform.
At first, those platforms were overcrowded and chaotic. There were mosquitoes, but no refreshments. Gradually, things changed. There was even a special food train.
The system of allocating season tickets for places on the platform to sleep, the provision of catering facilities, medical posts, pumping the sewage out of the tube back into the main drains above people's head, all that began to mitigate the experience of tube sheltering.
It was a time for taking cover. Later in the war, indoor air raid shelters like this one at the Imperial War Museum were commonplace, used as a dining table during the day with people sleeping underneath at night. There were also shelters in gardens and under the street. Nigerian-born Ita Ekpenyon was a volunteer air raid warden. He's seen here on the roof of the Royal Institute of British Architects building in Westminster, which is where I meet his daughter. On Christmas Day 1940, her father held a party underground.
We had plenty of music and songs, and there was laughter and happiness on all faces.
That year he'd become frustrated with the racism and unofficial segregation in his shelter used by locals and foreign refugees.
So he metaphorically knocked their heads together by saying, look, we are here, we come from different places, that if people couldn't live and work together here in the shelter, those who couldn't accept that should leave. And very few of them actually left, and it actually made for a better working relationship within the shelter.
It always brings back memories of coming down here, not to catch a train to go off somewhere and enjoy myself, to come down to get away from the Blitz, get away from the bombing.
Still using the tube and still thankful he never has to sleep down there again. Matthew Morris, BBC London News.
Never since the Great Fire of 1666 has such a roaring furnace swept through our capital.
Fires all over the place, all round St Paul's. The fires were out of control.
Stacey Simpkins remembers the night of December the 29th, 1940, one of the most devastating bombing raids of the whole war.
When you realise later on what had gone on, I think the only way you can describe it is you went, whew.
He was a 16-year-old messenger with the Auxiliary Fire Service, not officially old enough to help fight fires, but that is exactly what he did.
In the second Great Fire of London, our hearts beat stronger than ever.
Around 100,000 bombs fell that night, causing a firestorm across most of the square mile up to Islington. Crews had to ignore many burning buildings. They couldn't save them all.
So you'd have firefighters standing there not knowing and not noticing that the building which is on fire was about to collapse. And when that happened, of course, they lost a pump or a trailer pump, but unfortunately quite a number of times they also lost their crew members as well.
14 London firefighters died that night, 250 were injured. It was reported that as the fires raged, the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, telephoned the nearby Guildhall, which was on fire, to tell them that firefighting resources must be moved to the cathedral. St Paul's, he said, must be saved at all costs. And saved it was by the firefighters and by the St Paul's Watch, a group of volunteers who stayed behind to protect the cathedral.
Every night come the watch, architects, surveyors, artists.
So we're very grateful for what they did. They saved the cathedral. The fact that 28 incendiary bombs were extinguished by ordinary folk shows a tremendous determination and the miraculous power of human energy when it's properly used.
Members of the Watch had a logbook now in the Cathedral Library to keep details of incidents. The 29th was soon being called the Second Great Fire of London. The damage was even more widespread than in 1666.
I think that the only thing that saved St Paul's was the fact that the wind had changed. One word you can't apply to me is hero. I think the description for me is I'm the great survivor. Sheer luck. And that's what followed me throughout the entire war. Sheer luck.
Someone else was lucky that night, the man who risked his life to take this picture. More tomorrow on one of the most remarkable photographs of the war. Matthew Morris, BBC London News.
The whole of the skyline is lit up.
The night of December the 29th, 1940. No wonder they called it the Second Great Fire of London. And one photograph still stands out from that night. Was this really the war's greatest picture? It was for the Daily Mail. After all, their own photographer took the picture. This copy of the paper is held at the Museum of London. On the 29th, Herbert Mason was at the Mail's offices near Fleet Street. He went onto the roof as bombs fell all around him, climbing up this turret to get a good view.
He wasn't up here principally to take photographs. He was a volunteer fire watch warden. He had his camera with him, and obviously he was alert to the kind of possibility of the pictures. St Paul's was completely obscured by flame. There was a moment when suddenly, we think, the wind whipped up, the clouds began to clear, and the still intact dome of St Paul's was visible through those flames.
He was trying to get the shot?
Absolutely wanted to get the shot, and probably knowing that this would be a picture that would make it onto the front page and pass the censors. A shot that had a positive message of the heroic survival of the Dome of St Paul's.
I think that made it the iconic image, really, of Britain at war. It featured very much in British propaganda to the United States, which was vital, that we had to, show the Americans that we were still worthy of support.
Around the world, St Paul's Cathedral became a symbol of London's defiance. Fred Morley's photo of a milkman in the rubble was also used in Blitz propaganda.
We now know that the defiant, chirpy milkman is in fact Fred Morley's photographic assistant dressed up as a milkman, and if you look at it, it becomes this sort of artfully art-directed sort of advertising image. But you block the milkman out of that image and look at the scale of the devastation around it, and that is one of the most graphic depictions of that street-level devastation that ever appeared in the press. You could argue that it's creating a fiction to tell a greater truth.
The newsreels made sure everyone knew the Blitz spirit was alive and well, that people were strong, defiant, and when it came along, determined to enjoy Christmas.
Historians have tried to explode the myth of the Blitz, but have always come round to think that there wasn't a myth. In fact, it was true.
And for many, it will always be true that this is the most memorable picture of the war.